Good morning, everyone. Continuing now in our Gospel according to Mark Bible study. We are now in the 7th chapter, and I invite you to pause the video and please read verses 1 through 5. And now I'll move on to the questions. Question 1, why had this tradition of washing hands and dishes developed? There's been a lot of good work done by anthropologists that show that a lot of traditions, pre-scientific traditions that developed that make scientific sense, were connected to a kind of intuition about what spread disease, and so this is probably an example of that. Ancient Jews certainly didn't know anything about bacteria and viruses and things like that, but they had a sense of how disease was communicable. And so this tradition of washing hands and washing dishes developed. Cleanliness in general has, sort of been honored for a very long time in human history. Again, probably connected to the health related to cleanliness. Question 2, why would Jesus and his disciples have skipped this tradition sometimes? They were just very, very busy. They were wandering around, and sometimes the houses that they ended up at, the people might not have offered dishes to wash themselves. So there would have been all kinds of reasons why they might not have been able to follow this tradition. They might have gotten the pattern of not following it just because they're wandering from place to place and were too concerned with more important matters than to overly concern themselves with what Jesus is later going to describe as a human tradition. How did others feel about their neglecting this tradition of the elders? They were not happy about it. So the Pharisees had developed lots of strict rules that they understood to be righteous and which they understood to be rooted in the law of God. And so when these rules and regulations were not followed, they understood it to be a kind of breaking of the commandment. And so they were upset. Question 4, can you think of any other church traditions which might be valuable that we hold on to and which can upset people when we neglect them? There's plenty of examples of this. We all have the things that we think are important in worship services, the things that we think ought to be in every worship service or ought to be a part of what we do. There's things that have been a part of churches, missions, ministries for a long time, which have almost become kind of a tradition. And sometimes those traditions go away, and it's upsetting to people. Yet here we need to be careful, I think, about being overly judgmental about human traditions. For Jesus' response is in verses 6 through 12. Please read now verses 6 through 13, Pause the video and I'll continue with the questions. Question 5, what was Jesus' response to their criticism? Jesus brought up how they're honoring human traditions while at the same time sometimes neglecting the commandments, the clear commandments of God. And he gives the example of Korban, which was as long as you offered money to the temple, you could not offer regular assistance to your own parents. So Jesus' response is, there are very important things that are very clear in God's word that you are neglecting, and here you are criticizing us for something which is not clear in the Bible. Question 6. What does Jesus want to emphasize is more important than a lot of things we take so seriously? He's saying that we need to take seriously the honoring of our mothers and fathers. We need to take seriously the care of our loved ones, the care of our neighbors, the care of especially the elderly in our midst and widows and orphans, things that we sometimes neglect. There are people who are sick who cannot get the help that they need in our nation because they don't have insurance, or for whatever reason they're can't afford to get the procedures done that are necessary. And that is something that I think Jesus would criticize, that the Word is very clear about loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so if we ourselves care about our own health, then we should be sure to make sure that our neighbors can get the health care that they need. I've been harping about this quite a bit, you have noticed. Question 7, how are you showing love and care to your parents or elderly friends these days? So our elderly are hurting these days. They're not able to have regular fellowship, which they're used to. They're more used to face-to-face contact and fellowship, while Gen X and younger are more used to cyber communities and online communities. And so I just ask you to reach out regularly to your parents, to your grandparents, to the elderly that you know and love, and say hi and check in on them. And these are the things that Jesus is calling us to put first in our lives, making sure that those who are in need of love and care receive the love and the care that they need. Thank you so much for listening. Blessings.